Welcome to VBA Modeling for Supply Chain Planning and Financial Analysis. Here we will teach you how to write your own VBA code within Excel. This will be presented to you by Supply Chain Systems of Miami, Florida. Please contact us if you would like us to build models for you, or if you'd like to learn more about building the models for yourself. I hope you enjoy the tutorials, and please follow the link in the video description to get your own copy of the VBA code that is presented here. Alright, continuing with lesson number 1, we're just working on some of the basics of how to use the VBA. And right now we're at this section right here in the first lesson, where we're now going to activate the main sheet again. We're already on there, so shouldn't anything unusual happen here. We're just going to execute that particular line, and we're going to assign now the variables from the previous lesson. So we had var1 was defined up above. It was assigned a value of 5. Again, we could hover over the variable and see what went in there. And what we should be doing now that's different, instead of just assigning a value to a variable, we're actually going to write that value into a specific cell location on the worksheet. So when we execute this, watch what happens. We hit the F8 key, and the value of 5 is now put into a very specific location called A1. The next one, we're going to do something very similar. Hit the F8 key, and we can see that the value here again from up above was assigned the value of hello. This is lesson number 1, is a string. It was assigned to a string variable, and that variable now has been written to A2. Expanding on that idea, we're going to hit the F8 key one more time, and now notice what happens. We took the value that was var1 times 4. Since this value was 5 times 4 is 20. And if we click on that cell A3, which is where we wrote it, you can see that the value is 20. Now the next one is very similar, except that we're dealing with a string. When we execute this one, F8, it's the combination of two parts. The first part is string 1, which is the value that was assigned. Hello, this is lesson number 1. And then we concatenate with this special character, the ampersand sign, everything that's between the two quotes here. And we can continue this right along by putting more ampersands and concatenating multiple strings of characters together to come up with sentences, phrases, or paragraphs. So now you can see that this whole thing has been written into cell A5. This is assigning now, these have illustrated assigning individual values or variables or concatenated phrases into an individual cell. But we can do this much more massively now. We can actually say that we want to do more things with this. In this particular case, we're going to write a formula into a cell, and now that's going to be a calculated value. So when we hit F8 here again, now we see the value of 100 in that cell. It's not until we actually click on the cell and we look up in the formula bar up here where we can actually see that it wrote in there A3 times A1 equals 2, and we can see what A1 was a 5, A3 was 20, 5 times 20 is 100. But it actually is using that formula to calculate that. If we were to change this number up here at this point, obviously it's going to change the value that's in A5. So it wrote an actual formula into that cell. And this obviously is very powerful when you can write formulas programmatically, and you can have conditional statements, write different formulas for different reasons into a cell. But this is a much higher order command that we're using in this case. So we've seen now illustrations of how to write values in using the .value statement. when you use the dot formula, it's going to write a formula into that particular cell. And you have to always start a formula with an equal sign. The next one is assigning multiple values to multiple cells. So let's hit the F8 key now. And notice that we don't see any change yet, but it went into our worksheet data. But since we didn't select or activate it, we didn't see anything happen on the screen. If we go back now and we execute the next line, which is the same worksheet with the F8, now you can see that it actually wrote from A1 to B5. Let's get the cursor there. A1 to B5, this block right here, with the value of 5. So that could be an individual value that we can write to all those cells, or they could have been formulas that we wrote to all those cells. But we just did it to many cells at the same time. You can see that we're increasing the size of the operation and the magnitude, the impact, with each step along the way here as we go along. So we're building on our previous lessons here. All right. Next one, we've been dealing with columns before. I just wanted to show you that we can actually deal in rows as well. So now we're going to say on this particular worksheet, we don't have to repeat which worksheet we're on. It's going to assume that we're on the same worksheet. We're going to now do an operation on a set of rows everywhere from row 6 to 20. And if we hit the F8 key now, all right, everything from row 6 to 20 has been erased. The next line here, we talked about in our first lesson about the difference between relative addressing and absolute addressing. Now we're going to do an operation in a relative manner. We have selected or pre-selected C1 as our location. Now it's saying that in this particular case, we're going to take the active cell, which is C1. We're going to say offset, and the first location would have been row, but there is no value there, so it's on the same row. Minus 2 from that location means that's 2 to the left. If it was a plus, it would have been 2 to the right. So minus 2 says it's taking A1. The next one, the next one is going to be offset of only minus 1, which would have been B1. So it's A1 times B1 is going to be the value that's going to be put into C1. So when we execute this, let's see what happens. There it is. So 5 times 5 is 25. All right, so we didn't put a formula into that cell. We just put the value into that cell. All right, so when we click on it, you can see that there's the value of 25. This is the concept of an offset. So if you have tables of data and you've already selected which row that you're on for a particular product, you can refer to the other cells that may be referencing for its safety stock, its production rate, its current inventory values, its forecast, whatever. If they're all on the same row, all you would have to know is how many columns over that information is, and you would be able to reference it and use it and copy it into another sheet if you so desired. All right, now we're going to execute and say we're going to select one row down. Hit the F8 key. You notice it moved one row down. In this case, now we're actually going to do a little bit more powerful operation, just like we talked about before. We're actually going to write a formula into a cell, and let's put that in there. Let's go and execute F8 again, and you can see what happened here. It put B2 times A2, and the value there is 25 again. Alright, so similarly, there's a nomenclature here that's very similar to what we did up here, where we say equal R braces. There's two braces there, which means we're staying on the same row. one column to the left times same row, two columns to the left. Very similar to before, but you notice that we're now using a different format, and Excel has this other format there called the R1C1 formula. Okay, so if you put this designation in here, like we before when we put in just the word formula up here, we put in formula R1C1, we can use this nomenclature to indicate relative addressing. And in the end, it converted that to the same format that you're used to. It's the B2 times the A2. It didn't actually write it in this format. It did a conversion into the format that you would normally use. But this is how you can use actual numbers in there, and you'll find out that this is a much easier way of dealing with things because you can't really add, you can't count with letters. So using the numbers is allow you to do iterations, put things within loops, and to be able to do things in a much more massive manner. Okay, the next one is very similar to that. You can see it's the same formula R1C1, and now we're going to write formulas into multiple cells. And watch what happens when we execute this one. Oh, I'm sorry. I was in the middle of an operation there. There we go. Okay. Now what it did from C3 to C5, it wrote in formulas. So C3 to C5. Notice how it incremented and it automatically adjusted the formulas so they stayed on the same rows. So now from C3, it's B3 times A3, B4 times A4, and B5 times A5. So now let's assume that you're working with 25 or even 1,000 different products, and you wanted to convert units of measure. For example, you wanted to go from the metric system to the English system or vice versa. You can multiply the factor that may be appearing in one column times the value of what that particular unit was. Let's say it's a starting inventory. And you can have a formula that would be adjusted automatically and write that formula into all the cells in that column so that they would adjust and bring in the proper information. So I didn't have to individually tell it that this is row number 3, row number 4, row number 5, and etc., even 100 times. So this is a very powerful way of writing formulas and keeping everything calculating and the right formulas put into the right cells. All right, this is just about the end of lesson number 1. I want to just show you a couple other things here. And we're going to go back to our main sheet. We're going to write in end of lesson 1. We're going to select that particular cell. We're going to make that cell bolded. And we're going to show you how to change some other things about that cell. Okay, so we just changed the color of it. We changed the kind of font that is used and the size of the font. And this is showing how you can actually take and change the formatting. You can do it on individual lines, and this is showing how to change format in a massive way where you're picking the same cell but you're changing multiple types of formatting options for that one cell. Again, let's take the same concept here where we have a block of formatting. So the selection, all these things are going to happen to this. So when we execute each of these lines here, watch what happens to this one. Boom. It now is said that we're going to change the horizontal and vertical alignment. We're going to wrap the text, and the orientation is going to be at 45 degrees. So this kind of gives you some of the power of how to format your spreadsheets And you can do this to multiple cells again if you pick the range of cells. It did it to whatever the selection was for these particular operations. All right, I hope you enjoyed this lesson and hope to see you back the next time, and we'll continue on with our next lesson.